Disclaimer: the subject matter discussed in this show relates to weapons and other items that have been or could be used in violent acts. The discussion of these items is intended only for education and entertainment. We do not condone or support violent or improper use of any topics discussed in this show. Hey, welcome back to Wicked Weapons. This is, I think, episode 8, if we're going in order of however many weapons we've actually covered. We've had some different kind of episodes in there. But today is actually going to be the first episode where I did not do the document. Matt and my mom, Denise, have done us the courtesy of doing all the research for this one. So I am actually in the dark as to the episode's contents. So I know we're covering the Sharps rifle, but we're going to get into it. So, but anyways, I'm here and I've got Matt back on as always.
What's up?
And we are also joined yet again by my lovely mother.
Hello.
Since
You
y'all
call
did
her
the
audible and put Lindsay on in the middle of this. Just tell her to leave the headphones reading.
get Lindsay on.
Don't prep her for it. Just bam, here you go.
Mom, I'm gonna say since you and Matt did all the research, I'll just let you start in
Okay.
on the first page.
Yeah, I just wanted to start with just a special note of that early firearms or independent creations uh, made with tedious shaping, filing, and fitting of parts. So very few guns ever had parts that were interchangeable from one firearm to another. So, on the background of the Sharps rifle, I'm going to begin during the early Revolutionary War. Congress, under the authority of President George Washington, had approved a bill for the erecting and repairing of arsenals and magazines, which led to America's first national armory, the Springfield Armory, established in Springfield, Massachusetts in 1794. Within their first year, they manufactured 245 flintlock muskets. In 1796, the government selected the site for a second national armory, according to the National Park Service. A 125-acre parcel of land bounded by the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers was purchased from the heirs of Robert Harper. Construction began in 1799 for the United States Armory and Arsenal at Harpers Ferry. By 1802, full-scale production of arms at Harpers Ferry had begun. Harpers Ferry produced muskets, then rifles, and in 1805 began manufacturing pistols. By 1810, the Harpers Ferry production average was 10,000 firearms per year. Harpers Ferry workforce started with 25 employees in 1802 and grew to about 400 employees by 1859. An inventor, go ahead.
Sorry. Just real quick, the thought occurred to me. I just wanted to point out, like the drastic change between the flintlock stuff that each thing was handmade by like individual gunsmiths, and then the Industrial Revolution took place.
Right.
So it's like they went from in a year they made 245 flintlock muskets, and then 20 something years later
10,000.
they were making 10,000 guns in a year. I mean, that's massive difference.
Right.
Yeah, the machines and everything that were changing. I mean, it's really cool. I mean, you even see that today, just from guns I started with to what's out there now. It's just
Yeah.
it's the ideas and stuff coming out. The production levels are some good, some bad, but it is pretty impressive,
Yeah, like the
especially back then.
I wonder how many thousands or millions of high points are out there.
Yeah. Well, and when you look in, I know she'll get into it later, but like the machines today, the CNC machines that can make it exactly to the thousands or less, identical over and over and over to
Yeah.
them doing it on lathes that were run from a belt driven coming down from the ceiling. I mean, you look at some of those old manufacturing plants, it's like it's surprised anybody ever walked out there with all their fingers and toes. And, it's insane. But to be able to make accuracy and repetition that they could is just incredible.
Yeah.
Well, one of the key factors to the manufacturing is John Hancock Hall. And that's where I was headed to next. An inventor, machinist, and gunsmith by the name of John Hancock Hall came to Harpers Ferry in 1819. Paul used his excellent machinist skills to perfect his idea of the uniformity principle. He had made it possible to make interchangeable gun parts. According to Ammoland.com, when Harpers Ferry flooded in 1852, all the firearms were damaged by the floodwaters. These guns had to be completely disassembled. All the parts were put into different piles and cleaned of any rust, mud, debris from this flood. All of the cleaned pieces were taken at random and guns were put back together. This was random parts from some 10,000 individual guns, and all the parts went together in perfect working order without any need for any additional fitting or filing. So that just blows your mind.
Yeah.
That he did that with such precision.
I mean, half the guns we get here when we're replacing parts, there's some sort of fitting going on, and I've seen the guns. That's kind of how we, in a long way, got started. I mean, it was right after Katrina, when a family and friend had brought all these guns that had been in a safe, flooded in the basement of their house. By the time they got to it, the safe had actually floated, and it was big enough you could walk inside of it. But he had an incredible collection, but they were just disgusting. I mean, it was just horrible to see. I mean, it was just kind of made you mad and sad all at the same time because of some things that he had. But but stripping all that down and no damage, and then being able to put everything back together was a miracle. Me just doing a couple, let alone 10,000 parts from this one to that one to this one, and everything goes back together. That's very, very impressive.
Well, and you got to think if they're making 10,000 guns in a year and they're all like perfectly identical, those workers probably knew exactly. Like I'd be interested to know. I'm sure there's no info on this, but like I'd be interested to know how quickly those workers could put one gun together.
Oh yeah, just fly through it.
Yeah.
As precise as his guns were, Hall's breech loaders did have gas leakage issues at the breech, which caused a 25% lower muzzle velocity compared to the muzzle loaders of that time. And their 52 caliber ball ammunition could only penetrate 1/3 of the distance compared to the penetration of the other muzzle loaders of that time. And we could continue here and keep talking about Captain John Hancock Hall and his breech loaders, but we're actually here to talk about someone that he had mentored, Christian Sharps. According to RockIslandAuction.com, Christian Sharps began his gunsmith apprenticeship in 1829 at the age of 19. At Harpers Ferry Arsenal, under the training of Captain John Hancock Hall, Christian Sharps became well instructed in the manufacturing of early breech-loading rifles with, of course, fully interchangeable parts. I'm not certain of when Sharps left Harpers Ferry, but we do know that he relocated to Cincinnati, Ohio in 1844. Christian Sharps then designed a large bore breech-loading single shot rifle with double set trigger that used a linen or paper wrapped cartridge. This rifle usually used a vertically sliding breech block. The lever actuation or movement of the lever forward lowered the breech block. This falling of the block would allow access for the user to insert the cartridge directly into the action end of the barrel. As the user returns the lever to a trigger guard position, the breech block moves back up. This rising of the block not only closes the bore, but also shears off the back end of the linen or paper cartridge. This shearing exposes the black powder charge to the action and separate percussion cap. A double set trigger is used when ready to shoot by squeezing the back trigger first. This back trigger locks the front trigger into a very light pull or hair trigger position. If the shooter prefers a longer trigger pull, they can forego the use of the back trigger and just use the longer pull of the front trigger by itself.
Okay, so I'll take over from here, but
Okay.
I also just want to explain for any listeners that may not be super familiar, which I mean, that's all a pretty good explanation, anyways. But basically, to explain a hair trigger, the trigger on a gun, when you're firing it, it has a different. Each gun has a different amount of force required to pull that trigger back. And a hair trigger is basically a term for a trigger that, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there like a spring or something with the trigger? Or no, it's
No, you're right. I mean, it is. There's always there's a spring pushing resistance, and then it's contact with the sear.
yeah, so it's basically like a tensioner on that trigger. And a hair trigger is basically a trigger that you barely have to touch it and it'll go off.
Those go down to. I mean, we can do some nowadays down to 1-2 ounce. I mean, just barely even the fat out of your skin of your finger will set off the trigger.
Just
and
hold
one
the
thing,
gun up and just blow on it.
right? And one thing for those that I know different, depending on where they're listening, and if we got a video on top of this, but for those that don't, like when she was talking about the lever action, most people think of your cowboy style lever action, and but it was different on these. It was the actual trigger guard itself that you push down. So there wasn't a lever back for your middle or your middle finger, ring finger, and pinky to lever it. So just so you can kind of get that in your head when she was talking about the lever action and then going back to trigger guard position.
Yeah. This design earned him his first ever patent on September 12th, 1848. Christian Sharps received more than 50 other patents throughout his lifetime. This was his first of 15 firearms-related patents. Sharps took this first patent and made a contract with Albert S. Nips. Am I pronouncing that right?
As far as I know.
Okay, well, Albert Nipples of Mill Creek.
That's not the right pronunciation.
Yeah, I'm gonna try not to read that as nipples. It's gonna be hard. All right, Albert S. Nips of Mill Creek, Pennsylvania, for 100 to 200 Sharps breechloaders. As early as 1848, Albert S. Nips had started producing Sharps model rifles. Albert S. Nips produced both Sharps Model 1849 and Sharps Model 1850. Matt, I wanted to, reading that made me think about, you talked about, I want to say it was in the harmonica guns episode, talking about Browning and how he would like contract out his patents.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like Christian Sharps did a very similar thing with his.
I don't know what he did with his patents per se, but that's what Browning did. Instead of most people, it would cost them more to be able to defend their patent. So that when he would sell his patent, that was in the contract that whoever was responsible for defending their patents, because that's what would back in the day make people go broke,
Yeah,
or bankrupt against another company. And I guess it still probably does today, but
yeah. I mean, shoot, legal stuff. I think it makes everybody go broke.
But I think this was, especially back then, that's the only way you're really going to get a big order of anything is to the military government of some sort.
Yeah, yeah. Because I'm looking at like this contract with Albert Nips, and it's like 100 to 200 rifles. That's, to me, that's not a huge contract when you're producing something. But yeah, anyways.
Back then's quite a bit.
Yeah. In 1851, in Hartford, Connecticut, Christian Sharps organized the Sharps Rifle Manufacturing Company. Sharps himself did not own this company, but did serve as the company's engineer. He parted ways with Sharps Rifle Manufacturing Company sometime between 1852 and 1855, depending on what source you look to, with most saying 1853 or 1855. Many of these first Sharps rifles were supplied to the Union Army and Navy during the American Civil War, which began April 12, 1861. By the end of the American Civil War, May 26, 1865, the Union Army had purchased 100,000 Sharps rifles. Sharps moved to Philadelphia, where he formed his own manufacturing facility, C. Sharps and Company. The company was renamed in 1862 as Sharps and Hankins in partnership with William Hankins. Among the weapons Sharps and Hankins produced were the single-shot Model 1861 Navy rifles, single-shot Model 1862 carbines, and four-barrel pepperbox pistols. Callback.
I knew you'd like that.
Yeah. Sharps and Hankins ended their partnership in 1866, and the company resumed the name of C. Sharps and Company in 1867. Through his military connections, Sharps knew someone who had started a successful nipple hatchery. No, I'm sorry. Successful fish hatchery. By 1870, the production demand of his rifles had diminished, so Christian Sharps and his family relocated to Vernon, Connecticut. There, he started a trout farming business. Some sources say he continued to work on firearms designs. I'd like to imagine he probably drew one up that was shaped like a fish. This is a weird pop culture reference, but so there's this game called Terraria that me and Scott played quite a bit when I was a little younger, and basically it's like this 2D side-scrolling game, but it's almost like Minecraft. You have to dig stuff up, like mine for ores and stuff. But at a certain point, they added guns into the game, and one of the guns you could get, I'll have to look up a picture of it to include in the video, but it was like a Gatling gun or a machine gun, but it was like a shark with the barrels coming out of its mouth. I wish I could remember what the name of it was. Anyways, Sharps at some point contracted tuberculosis. He passed away at his home in Vernon, Connecticut on March 12, 1874, at the age of 64. In 1874, the C. Sharps and Company was reorganized
into the first galactic empire.
The C. Sharps and Company was reorganized as the Sharps Rifle Company, with operations remaining in Hartford until manufacturing was moved to Bridgeport, Connecticut in 1876. The last rifle produced by the Sharps Rifle Company was the model 1878 Sharps Borchardt, developed by Hugo Borchardt, which isn't Hugo Borchardt from the firearm trivia episode? Wasn't he the one who made the first semi-automatic?
I think so.
Okay.
He was in our trivia game, and I can't remember what he did do though.
I want to say that's what it was, but that just
Sounds
shows
right.
everybody listening how much we remember from that.
Yeah, retain nothing.
These 1878 rifles were produced until 1881, at which time the Sharps Rifle Company became bankrupt and ceased operations. For anybody listening, if you want to go listen to our firearm trivia episode, whether you haven't listened to it or if you just want to listen to it again and fact check us, that'd be great. Sharps rifles were not the first breech-loading rifles. However, Sharps rifles were produced in large quantities with the onset of the American Civil War. The carbine version was widely used by the Union Army. The Sharps rifle was also used extensively in the American West as military and hunting weapons. The Sharps was a preferred gun of large game and buffalo hunters. Sharps rifles also became the first official gun of the Texas Rangers. They became favorite firearms because of faster reloading capability, long range accuracy, and power. Of course, barrel length, caliber, black powder amount, and bullet weight will always play a part in shot distance, power, and or penetration. In the hands of a skilled marksman, the Sharps rifles have a rate of fire of 8 to 10 shots per minute and effective firing range of 1,000 yards and a maximum firing range of 3,000 yards. One famous shot of a Sharps rifle was made on June 30th, 1874, in what is now the Texas Panhandle, using a model 1874 Sharps rifle loaded with a 50-90 465 grain cartridge. Matt, I guess is that 50 caliber?
Yeah, we go over that a little bit later, but it's
a
okay. I get it now. I get it now. So it's like the 45-70 caliber, but it's 50-90.
Yep.
And then it was
and then the bullet grain is
465 grain is the weight, right?
correct.
That's correct.
Okay. 24-year-old William Billy Dixon made a 1,538-yard shot that hit and knocked a Comanche Indian from his horse. This shot effectively ended the second battle of Adobe Walls.
That's crazy.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Matt, if you want to, I'll let you take
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I'll take it from here.
I'm having trouble talking. My throat's scratching so bad.
Oh, you're good. There's a modern day C Sharps Arms Company Incorporated. They began in 1975 in Richland, Washington. They relocated their headquarters and manufacturing company to Big Timber, Montana in 1980. They produce modern versions of the Christian Sharps rifles. In
That
1983, go ahead.
I'm sorry. That almost makes me think of like the Henry rifles. They also
Mhm.
stopped being produced, but now there's a modern company that produces them.
Right.
Just pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. In 1983, also in Big Timber, Montana, Shiloh Rifles Manufacturing Company began to produce modern reproductions of the legendary 1874 Sharps rifle, which gained new fame upon it being featured in the MGM movie 1990 Western Quigley Down Under, starring Tom Selleck as Matthew Quigley. And I guess it's fitting that one, I'm reading this section because that's, we were doing this one, and that's kind of one of them that brought to my head, but that's what got me into, and I know a lot of people in my generation got us into long range shooting, was watching that movie. And I can still visualize being as a kid sitting with dad, and both of us sitting there with our 4570s. Mine wasn't a Sharps, but it was an older rolling block, and he had a Sharps, and we're like little kids sitting there watching that movie, and him shooting all the long range stuff and the bucket, and just it's it and that's part of my obsession with 4570s still to this day.
That's neat. I think I've seen. I think you showed me that movie at some point.
No, I'm
Or
sure
it was
I have.
on. It was on, and I saw some of it, and I don't know. I think you showing me that movie was like the first time I'd ever seen a gun that had the octagon barrel.
Mhm. Yeah,
It's
they
just
really place that rifle in that, and they really get into it with the camera and him even describing it. And he makes I've heard different numbers, but it's pretty much 800 yards. I think they somebody mathed it out saying like 783, but like the first scene when he really shows it, and he's shooting at a bucket and out that distance, and nobody believed he could do it, and he hit it, and even at the very beginning, like this guy in this movie, you don't have to watch the movie, but he sends out needing help, and everybody wrote letters, but he didn't. He took the advertisement and
and
shot it,
shot it.
like shot a 3-shot group at it, and then wrote, I think it was like 900 or something yards at that time, and then his signature, and then mailed it back to the guy. So he didn't write anything, just this is what I did, here you go. Which I always thought, if we were ever producing guns, that's kind of how I'd want to do it. Here's our advertisement for them. Here's what we just shot. Bam, here you go. Just something really cool.
yeah, that'd be really cool.
And you've done that too for some of your customers.
Oh, yeah.
When you're giving them their rifle, you've included a target that you shot.
Yeah, and that's where I got the idea from. Just on there, I just always thought would be one way to, here's our signature.
I can't tell you. I've got that coworker that you cited in one of his rifles,
Mm-hmm.
and now like he's constantly asking me about getting you to cite in another one.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It makes an impression, because
It does, and that's when a lot of people don't have the patience to sit down and actually truly sight one in. They're getting in a hurry, and your accuracy is always going to be different once you just blast and heat up your barrel and things like that. And a lot of people just aren't confident. They may shoot good that day, good not day, and not just repetitively.
and
Which I grew up. That's what I was doing. I love taking the recoil of guys' guns that they couldn't or didn't want to, and I'd just sit at the range shooting people's rifles because I just loved recoil. So it didn't bother me. I love it. So,
and
um,
guys like my coworker, they've got these rifles that they only pick it up during deer season.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
so
And everybody's always shooting with the biggest caliber they can find, and it kills on one end, wounds on the other end. So they're always scared to shoot it, and they might shoot once, and hey, great, and then, but it's not really sighted in type thing. So, but that just comes from all you can do on that is practice some more. So, All right. So where are we at? For all those that aren't certain about the difference between a rifle and a carbine, a rifle is a long gun with a rifle barrel, not a smoothbore barrel, that is designed to be fired from the shoulder. A carbine is a rifle that has a shorter barrel. What? Yeah, you go into this. Sorry. In modern day, the term carbine is reserved for long gun with a barrel less than 20 inches in length. In the United States, a carbine barrel cannot be less than 16 inches. A rifle with a barrel less than 16 inch in length is considered a short barrel rifle. It requires extra paperwork to purchase and a $200 national firearms stamp.
And for those that don't know, that regulation is in place specifically because it makes it a concealable rifle. And that's actually kind of the same concept between why sawed-off shotguns are illegal as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get in trouble if I go on unleash on that subject, because that's a hot button for a lot of people. So I won't go into that one, but yeah, and it's very, very highly regulated, and it can take up to, well, we're going on 2 years on suppressor waiting, actually, over that. Long story, but it's just a nightmare on some things like that. But that was all under the National Firearms Act. Short barrel rifles, short barrel shotguns, suppressors, full autos. Those are all clumped in that section. All right. Basically, the term carbine equates to a shorter, more compact, lighter weight weapon. Usually, this comes with loss of bullet velocity unless adjustments are made to the cartridge load development. Is this? Yep. All right. So the legendary Sharps has been developed for many cartridges, including but not limited to 4050, 4070, 4477, the 4570, 4590, 110. I'm just jumping on those. 5070 and the 5090. And just I'm gonna stop myself there, as we mentioned earlier, but the first number is the caliber. The second is the powder charge, which at the time would have been black powder inside the cartridge. And if there was a third number, that's your grain weight of the bullet.
And at this point, have they moved to brass cartridges, or was it still I guess the paper cartridge it was talking about was when it was still pretty early on.
Yeah. And they converted. Denise, do you remember when they started converting because they
meant to have that.
And then
I meant to have that in there, but it was fairly early. Sorry, I'll have to.
No, that's fine. And yeah, I can't remember exactly, but yeah, originally all of these were.
I'm pretty certain it was during the Civil War.
Right. Okay. Well, and then this, the most popular. I'll pick it up here, and it kind of shows it, or it says some on it. However, the most popular and my personal favorite, as I mentioned earlier, is the 4570 government. And it was developed in 1873 and becoming the primary cartridge for the U.S. Army and produced by the U.S. Army's Springfield Armory, and remained the primary cartridge for almost 20 years. The 4570, first labeled 4570 500, go into repeat myself, but was a 500 grain 45 caliber lead nose projectile in front of 70 grains of black powder. Originally developed for the U.S. Springfield 1873 trapdoor rifle, which itself made famous at the Battle of Little Bighorn, also known as Custer's Last Stand. And for those that don't know, I had history, and that was one that always stuck out. And there's a lot of argument between different sources and things, but I'd always heard, hearing of that in the store was their guns were jamming, because the trap doors, it's really hard to describe it. Like there's the whole top of the breech. There's a little lever on the side and it flips open and you reach down in to load the bullet. But they were, with the expansion, everything, I mean, there'd be a lot of contributing factors, but the brass would get hung up in there. And when they go to lift it out, or when you lifted that trap door, it kind of shot the brass out. You could dump it, grab it out, throw a new one in and go.
So
But
it
they would
wasn't
either
like modern guns that have just a like modern semi-automatics have an ejector.
right.
that
Well,
kicks
this
that
had a little
brass out.
hook, and that's what would either the hook would break or the back of the brass would pop off. They said that like on the battlefield when they went around afterwards, there were, because actually, I can't remember if they actually put it on or they left on some of the conversions a ramrod, and that was just for being able to knock the brass out. And there was a lot of guys that were killed, and their ramrod was stuck down the bore. They were trying to fix it. Their gun was essentially useless at the time, so they were fixing their gun because they're just a paperweight at the time in their hands. So, but there's been a lot of different rumors on that, on how it stood, but it did become part of it because they were, I think there was a lot of training, some other stuff that wasn't really developed for it at the time.
I have the answer to
Oh.
to that question, and I was wrong. It was actually a little beyond the Civil War because it was 1872, and the first cartridge was produced in 5090
Yes. Yes. Yep.
in 1872.
Okay. All right. The 4570 had been used in many firearms over the years, from a tiny Derringer, which I call those hand cannons, to a Magnum Research revolver, properly named BFR. And I was going to have something funny to do there, but I forgot all about it. This was the part I was talking about. There's multiple names, but would be the big F word revolver but it's,
Yeah,
think
I thought that's what that meant.
yeah, but that's not really what it is. It's they've got an actual name for it, but that's just the kind of joke they do with it. As well as many lever actions that are still in use today and produced today, including guide rifles used for hunting and defense from large aggressive wildlife, and also used in one version of Richard J. Gatling's Model 1881 Gatling gun, which was capable of firing at a rate of 400 rounds per minute.
That's going to be that'll
we'll
be
have to do
one
next
we need to cover.
Yeah, I mean, because I just couldn't imagine 400 rounds a minute of 4570 being flung at you. I mean, and being that's getting close to the first
I
quote
didn't even
unquote
see
fully
that.
automatic.
I didn't even
You
see
know.
that you had, which will have to be an episode to itself.
Yeah, because a must on it.
I think y'all have your next document topic.
Interesting side note: the 4570 cartridge minus the bullet were used to punch holes in railroad webbing in such devices. And you'd have to look below if you're listening on us, or not below, but Jared will pull a picture. But such devices, they were called the railroad punch, and it was detailed on Progressive Reloading's railroading website. The expanding gases, which drive a combination movable piston and punch unit assembly forward to instantly punch a hole through the web of a rail. So if you're looking at a railroad track, you got the bottom part, the top that the train rides on, and that vertical part is what they call the webbing of it. The frame of the rail web punch is designed to guide and shield moving parts. So basically, like a blanket guard is provided to protect the operator from possible scale or dirt resulting from the punch operation. And we'll have to show a picture, but Dad we always had these boxes because I don't know where he found them, but there were these little boxes, and it's 4570 brass, but there's no stamp on the back of it. It doesn't. Most, for those who don't know, you look on the back of a brass, it's going to be either the whole manufacturer of the whole cartridge or whoever just produced that brass for said loading. And these had nothing on the back of them, but they were essentially just an unused 4570 brass. But the little box had the rail punch and what it was, which I've got one that's like I haven't even never. I mean, we've opened it, looked at it, but they're still brand new. It's pretty interesting. Just kind of one of those nerd.
That cartridge still had the powder in it.
No, yes, those did. The ones I have are just a primer. They're just empty brass with the primer. But yeah, theirs would have it all.
The reason I'm asking is because that makes me think of the nail guns that use 22 cap, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And they, instead of having a bullet in the cartridge, they just like crimped the end of the cartridge.
Yeah, it's just your blanks. And they I mean, there's other things the M1 Grands in World War I and II. There was you could shut the gas off, load so it doesn't try to load one of these blanks, and then they would put basically a grenade on the end of their barrel, and you shoot, the blank would fire that grenade off to a lot further, basically a little mini mortar that they just slide on the end, which seems like a really bad idea, but it worked. They used it for a long time, but just seeing a mad rush of having a full live cartridge that just blows into the bottom of that grenade. I have no idea what would happen in that case. But anyway, we got just a few more here. One more interesting usage is in the U.S. Navy. Not only were those 4570 Gatling guns mentioned above, mounted on ships launched in 1880 and 90s, the 4570 cartridge was widely used as a line throwing cartridge in specialized line throwing guns, which early models often modified from older rifles like the Trapdoor Springfield, and is still in use today in the capacity as a blank cartridge marked caliber 45 blank cartridge for line throwing guns, the M32. And that's I didn't find any, but I thought that was interesting that they still use that blank today to fire rope from ship to ship that they could then pull in another rope.
Yeah, that's nuts. That's really cool.
Yeah. The 4570 is also the parent cartridge to many variations, including 4590, 45110, which held 90 or 110 grains of black powder, allowing for larger and faster load development. Sierra's manual also mentions that the 4570 500 grain cartridge, being designed originally for the full-size trapdoor, was too much for smaller carbine that was issued, so they had to drop the bullet weight to 405 grains with a 55 grain black powder cartridge, labeled as you would expect, the 45, 55, 405. So I'm assuming those being so much lighter and that big, I mean, they just had to be rocking you, just the recoil. Lastly, the 4570 cartridge was even rumored to have been the cartridge used to decimate the American bison population, and is still used in many states today for deer season. In those states, such as Illinois, if you don't want to use a muzzleloader or a shotgun, the only option the hunter can use is a straight wall cartridge, which is the 45. Your traditional ones have got a little step down, or we call them bottleneck. Straight wall case in a single shot rifle or pistol. And there's only a handful of cartridges that fit that bill. I myself plan to use one of these, hopefully the 177-year-old design, with which we personally have a Pedersoli replica Sharps 4570, and using a 152-year-old cartridge during deer season. Obviously, not the cartridge that old, but just the design.
Yeah,
both the 4570 and its 45-110 can hit a bucket at roughly 800 yards, which doesn't Doesn't make it a weapon on its own, but it is definitely a wicked round.
Nice.
Yep.
I like the.
I figured you'd like that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nick won't like us for using those.
No, he
Using
in fact
puns.
he'll probably avoid ever being back on if we keep making puns like that. Yeah, so for all our listeners out there, if you notice that I was coughing like constantly, it's because I've got a little bit of a head cold, but getting over it. And yeah, so if you made it this far, sorry for me coughing and stuff, but I think it was a very interesting topic for today's episode. Can't wait to do the Gatling gun. That's going to be a fun one.
Absolutely. We got to find one that we can shoot.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
what
for
would be
real.
fun.
We need to trick it out, like get it gold plated.
Oh, geez.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I've always thought that's ugly.
Just so you know, Hugo Borchardt did introduce the first semi-automatic pistol to make a lasting impact on the market.
I knew it because
the Borchardt C93. I think that was one of the ones you got correct.
Yeah, I think so. I guess that's why it stuck with me. It was one of the only questions you had that I felt confident on. Yeah. Do either of y'all have any closing thoughts?
I do not. That was in depth. I hadn't gone. I did part of the cartridge, or I did cartridge. She did the big research stuff. So
yeah, I like that though. I like the
oh, for sure.
And actually,
and I like what you said, the all of it being a surprise as you go into it. I like the not knowing, just kind of learn as I go along on the stuff I hadn't heard before, clarified.
Definitely be fun if we
There
ever
was
get bigger to have somebody outside of the loop doing the documents for us.
Right.
But the next episode we're going to do is actually going to be a fictional thing. It's going to be from Halo, and I've done that document, and I kind of did a similar thing like y'all did, where I talk about the main topic, but then I actually relate it into real life equivalents that we've tried to produce. So yeah, so if you're listening, stay tuned for that. Mom, I'll let you say what you were going to say.
Oh, I was just going to say the sharps. There was other stuff that I didn't pull in because the document was getting so long already.
Yeah.
It had lots of nicknames like Beecher's Bible, because the anti-slavery, they shipped a bunch of these rifles out to Kansas to fight against slavery and to keep those men out there free.
Yeah.
And they labeled them as books and Bibles, and so these guns earned that nickname as Beecher's Bible.
That's
awesome. And then
I guess that's how they hid the shipment. They mislabeled the crates.
Yeah, the crates were intentionally labeled as books and Bibles, and the guns were in the bottom of the crate with actual books and Bibles on top of them to hide them.
Awesome.
So that if someone actually looked in there, they would see the books and say, "Okay, it's really books," and close it back.
That's really cool.
Free border.
They were also like
smuggling.
The Big 50. There was some other nicknames.
Now was that during the Civil War, or was that like prior to? Because I know there was a lot of tension in Kansas prior.
Yeah, it was prior. It was building up to it.
Because that was, I think you mentioned it in the doc there that like you referred to the Panhandle of Texas, but you said what would be the Panhandle of Texas.
Because it wasn't yet.
Yeah, a lot of the more western states, which we're actually originally from Missouri ourselves, so Kansas right next to Missouri, but at that pre-Civil War time, Missouri was established, but like Kansas and all those western states were actually just territories. And there was like a lot of battling because the slavery thing was such a hot button issue at the time. A lot of people were like moving to those territories to try and make the state a free state or a slave state. And it, you know, interesting history stuff. Maybe we'll have to, we might have to do like I've been toying with the idea of doing a propaganda episode.
That was a weapon on its own, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, just to talk about how that was used, and really is still being used today. But we're not don't need to get too political on here. But yeah. Anyways, this was a fun topic, and thank y'all for listening. And if you enjoyed the show, please like, comment, subscribe, check us out on the platforms that we're on. And we actually have an Instagram now, so I'm gonna I'll include that at the closing of the video. I'll put it up on screen and put it in the description as well. So anyways, we'll catch y'all next time.
Bye.
See you later.